Hey everyone, we're going to do a little different video today. This marks the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, which happened August 29th, 2005. Behind me is what is called the 17th Street Canal. It's one of the levees that had breached during that time. Now, this covers the New Orleans and Jefferson Parish line. And at the time, on Thursday, I made a trip on my bicycle to try to get my car out of the parking lot, which was downtown. We all got stuck here. We were working on a film called Last Chance with Michael Keaton and Brandon Fraser. Other people got stuck here too. There was the traveling show for Wheel of Fortune, and Pat Sajak and Vanna White and a lot of other people got stuck here, among other things. And so what happened was I had to get my way through where the Army National Guard, you had different sheriff's department, you had all kind of people that were blocking the way because they weren't letting anyone through into Orleans Parish at the time. They had locked the city down. Well, part of this trip, which was a little further up the road behind you on Metairie Road, I had rode my bicycle on that Thursday to try to go get my car out. And I was listening to a radio show with Garland Robinette on WWL radio. He used to be a news anchor on WWL TV, and he was interviewing on the radio show. He was interviewing Mayor Nagin, and they just started busting down crying. I almost wrecked my bike because it was kind of weird hearing those two sobbing like they were. So I get to the area right there, which was all blocked off. That's a 17th Street Canal. And I had the right credentials to get through, and they let me through, and I started my journey to try to get my car out of the parking lot so I can get everyone out of town that I was with and, get to safety, find some food, hot food. We had food, but it was nice to get a good meal and a good hot meal. And so I started my trek on that Tuesday, which was quite horrifying when things really started happening that morning when the levee started breaching on Tuesday morning. And we ended up at the Walmart because we saw a bunch of people. I had a neighbor who was doing work at the Wyndham Hotel, and I told him I was going downtown, and he said, well, I'd like to go with you. So we took his truck, and we made it to Canal Street, and that's when the water started rising. And on our way there, we were going the back way, and we saw people with shopping carts full of stuff. There was a guy dragging a Nordic track down the street. I don't know what they were going to do with the Nordic track in the flood, but we asked them what store was open, and they said Walmart was open, that police were letting people in. So we go into the Walmart, and wow, what a scene that was. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So for now, I'm going to go to another area. Now, right past here is a cemetery on one side and a golf course on the other. And both were underwater. I would say about 4 feet of water. It was over waist deep, up to your chest. And I'm looking at the cemetery, and I'm like, well, I don't want to go through the cemetery. Well, the fence was blown down at the golf course. So I'm like, well, I'll just go through the golf course. So I went through the golf course, and as I got to the end of the golf course, there were there was a gated community, and there was a lot of homes there. And I hopped the fence, threw my bicycle over the fence, screamed out that I wasn't a looter. I was just trying to get through, and I made it through. But on my way going through the golf course, I hit one of the sand dunes, and I went totally underwater. It was crazy. And I remember there was a helicopter above me that kept circling me, I guess they were keeping an eye on me. I could understand that. But now what we're going to do, we're going to go to one of the other areas where there were boats everywhere, because it was weird. Because one area of the area that I'm going to bring you to was completely submerged in water. Under the bridge had to have been 20 feet of water. But as you got up near City of the Dead, is what they call it, and it's an area at the end of Canal Street where they have a lot of the cemeteries, and it's going towards City Park. And there were a lot of abandoned boats because the water had receded, and there were boats everywhere. And so we're going to go now, and I'm going to show you that area. Right now we're approaching the that's the golf course on that side, and that's the cemetery on that side. And both were underwater, as you can see, totally underwater. And as you see right there, the fence, and some of it was knocked down, and I was able to get through. Now, we're about to approach an underpass. And when I tell you, when I was climbing the fence to get into the backyard of that house and throwing my bike over, I made it back up towards this underpass. And when I tell you, if it wasn't 25 feet of water, 20 feet of water right here, it was scary. You used to be able to see on the columns the watermark of the where the flood and water sat. So we're about to approach City of the Dead, and I'm going to get out and film. This is the area that I'm talking about. This is City of the Dead. You have cemeteries on both sides. Now this whole area was covered with boats and pirogues and uh, rescue boats that had weren't able to get through because the water had receded, so they abandoned all the boats. And so I got up to this point, was able to walk my bike to the city park area, which kind of got me to uh, the Bayou St. John area, which is going to be my next stop. All of this going down Canal Street towards downtown was submerged, completely underwater. This whole area, like I said, there were spots where they had water, there were spots when they didn't have water, and it was just a mess. And there were people everywhere trying to get out. The interstate was the strangest thing. There were no cars because all the traffic was, the I-10 was closed, but they had hundreds of people walking on the interstate, and it was so hot. It looked like something out of The Walking Dead. It was the creepiest thing. It was a lot of chaos. I remember that Wednesday in Metairie near Causeway Boulevard, they had stationed a rescue area where helicopters were getting people out, and they were, you know, taking 5 and 6 at a time, whatever they could carry. But it was chaos everywhere in the city, including Mississippi and the North Shore of New Orleans. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go to the Bayou St. John, where I had some really incredible things happen. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to pan it around so you could see all the cemeteries. Yeah, I'm on that side. And then at the end of Canal Street, you have the bigger cemeteries. And of course, this one. Now, at the end of Canal Street, right here, there's a cemetery. It's behind the camera. And there's a cemetery called Odd Fellows Rest. And They practice witchcraft, they practice voodoo. You could see all kind of remnants of where they burn candles and do whatever stuff that they do when they do their witchcraft and voodoo in that cemetery. Once I get back in the car, when I drive by, I'll kind of take a quick video of it and show you what I'm talking about. This is Odd Fellows Rest right here. This is the cemetery that they do a lot of witchcraft and stuff like that in that cemetery. And there's the other cemetery. This whole area is surrounded by cemeteries. It's all cemeteries in this area. They call it City of the Dead. And there's more as you come down this way. Now, all this, there were patches of water and there were total dry spots. There were a lot of abandoned boats on this road as well, which is City Park Avenue. Yeah, it was pretty wild. So continuing on, I'm on Bayou St. John. This area here was pretty much underwater. Like I said, there were patches. Now, what you see behind me, the house, the green looking house with the steps going up, the white steps going up that the van just passed up. I'm on this side of the bayou and I was on my bike and there was a lot of water. Well, the water was high enough to where you couldn't see the embankment for the bayou. So it all like went into one. So if you would have went the wrong way, you would have ended up in the canal. So there was a guy who lived in that house that kind of was calling out to me to stay where I was. And he said he was going to get in his boat and come over and come get me. And I waited and I'm waiting for him to come. And the strange thing is, I kid you not, another guy comes rowing up on his boat and he didn't have a shirt on. He was on his way to bring some ladies that he knew some food on Broad and Tulane, which was quite a distance away. I don't know if he would have been able to, be in the water the whole time he was there. I don't know because I know there were a lot of dry spots or dry patches. So he comes up to me and he asked if I was okay. And I told him, yeah, I'm trying to get downtown to where my car was to get it out of the parking lot. And he said, well, get in the boat. I'll bring you. And I'm like, well, that's okay. I was kind of in a hurry at this time. It was the middle of the afternoon and you had to be back at your house by 6 o'clock because of the curfew. And all I wanted to do was just get there and, try to get the car out, which unfortunately I wasn't able to get it out because the water was too high. So as I'm talking to this guy who came up on the boat, he didn't have a shirt on. And this side of his chest, his whole collarbone and everything was smashed in. And I'm like, man, what happened to you? And he said he was carjacked, and where he was carjacked, he was still in the car, and the carjacker was in, driving, of course, and they were going over the Mississippi River Bridge, and he ends up kicking him out of the car while it was still rolling on the Mississippi River Bridge. The car rolled over his chest and, crushed his collarbone. Thank God he survived. I don't know how he survived, but he did. The funny thing is, I don't know why, he hands me or was going to hand me a handful of Vicodins. He goes, here, you want some? I'm like, no. Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, if I get in any more water, my clothes were wet as it is, that stuff's just going to melt. And I told him, no, thank you. So the guy who lives in this house starts rowing up towards me and he gets out of his boat and he goes, let me row you over to my house. He said, I'll put some garbage bags and duct tape on your feet so that you don't get in the water because there's a lot of stuff in the water. And I'm like, okay. And I asked him if it was okay to go through these neighborhoods to get to where I was going. He wasn't sure, of course. And so he rows me over and we go to his house right over there. And he goes inside. My bike's still right here on this side of the bank, on this side of the bayou. And he comes out with some garbage bags and duct tape, and he starts taping my legs and shoes up. And I told him thank you very much. And so he goes, well, come on, get in the boat and I'll bring you back over. And I'm okay. So look, I go to get in the boat. Now the water at this point over there at the house had to have been probably up the third or fourth step. It was at least waist deep. I know that. It was at least waist deep. So I go to get into the boat, and look, all of a sudden the boat starts doing this, flips over. I'm under the boat in the water, and I remember scraping my elbow, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get some kind of creepy stuff from the water, because the water was rancid. And the thing is, when I did make my trip down there, before I left, I had taken some antibiotics. I had Neosporin, I had peroxide. I brought, a little lunch and things like that because I didn't know, what the day was going to be like. And so I put the Neosporin and I doused it in peroxide. And he's like, let me get you some bandages. And I got some bandages. And, he brought me back over here to my bike, and I continued on to my journey. And I ended up going down Esplanade Avenue to get you know, to Rampart Street, which is where my car was in a high-rise parking lot. Now, our next stop is going to be a place on Esplanade Avenue that I encountered something that, has stuck with me for a long time. Once I get to that area, I'll explain what it is. It was terrible. So I will see you there. Now, right here, what you're looking at is a nursing home. Now, at the time I was coming down this road, which is Esplanade Avenue, it was probably about 2.5 feet of water, and there were power lines everywhere. And I'm like, I hope they don't turn the electricity on because I'll be electrocuted along with everyone else. Well, at this nursing home, the National Guard was there getting people out, the elderly people out, and they were stationed right there with their Humvees and their M16s or whatever they carry. So, but there's a funny side to that story. As I'm leaving and as I'm going down this way, there's a school down this way, and I'm walking my bike at the time, and there's about 3 unsavory characters that were headed my way. I didn't know if I was going to be robbed. I didn't know what was going to happen because they started like coming towards me, and it was a chaotic time. So I just, off the top of my head, to kind of distract them, I asked them, I said, hey, I said, have y'all been down the street where the National Guard is at the nursing home? And they're like, no, no. I said, well, they're down there and they're letting people hold their machine guns and they're letting them shoot the guns. I didn't know what else to say to kind of get them away from me. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, you see them down there? And they're like, wow, okay. So they started walking towards the National Guard, and I just kept on going. I could just imagine what they said when they went up to the National Guard and asked them to shoot their gun and let them hold their gun. They probably looked at them like they were lunatics. But it's just what I thought of off the top of my head. Now we're going to go a couple of blocks further down here, and you're going to hear a story that was quite strange and very unsettling, unforgettable actually. So we will continue. Okay, this area right here, behind me, right over here about in this area, there happened to be trees, uh, branches, all kind of things down, and it ended up making like a cove. So a lot of like trash bags and debris and things were gathered in this area right on the other side of the street. So I'm walking my bike and there's a bunch of stuff gathered there. I mean, all kinds of things. Well, I'm thinking it's a mattress. So what I did, I I'm walking my bike and I hopped over it like that to hop over it because it was flowered looking. So when I hopped over it, like a hand kind of came up. It was a body. It was actually a lady, and she had some rope tied around her. What happened was she must have gotten loose because what they did whenever they would recover bodies that were in the water, because they had a lot of volunteer rescue that would come over and get the bodies out, and they would tie them to stop signs, they tie them to telephone poles and things like that. Well, what happened, I guess this lady must have gotten loose from the telephone pole or stop sign, whatever she was tied to, and ended up drifting down to that area right over there where a lot of debris and stuff like that was gathered. But it was a horrible sight, a sight I'll never forget. I'm not going into detail how she looked or anything like that, but I'm sure you could use your imagination. But it was quite horrible. What would happen? They would gather up the bodies, like I said, and once the big recovery boats would come around, they would go to each stop sign or telephone pole or wherever the bodies were, and they'd gather them and they'd put them on the bigger boats. And unfortunately, this lady got through and or untied from the stop sign or telephone pole or whatever, and um, I'm sure eventually they discovered her and was able to recover her body. But it was madness. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go into more detail once I get back to my house and kind of fill you in on some of the other things that happened uh, from the time Katrina started to the time I was able to get my car out of the parking lot and get the hell out of town. So, our next stop, I would say, is the parking lot. That's the famous parking lot. I parked it on the second level, which was high enough, but the water was so high I still couldn't get the car out. But I was eventually able to get it out that Sunday. And look, this right here is where they had the Hard Rock Cafe crane collapse. That's where that was. And this is a theater that I did a lot of work at. It's called the Sanger Performing Arts Center. Did a lot of work there through the years with a lot of Broadway shows and many other things. But yeah, that's the parking lot. Um, I spent 5 days coming down here trying to get that car out. And like I said, I finally was able to get it out. And there was still water for about 2 blocks. And I pushed the car when I did get it out. I pushed the car about 2 blocks through the water. I'll tell you the story of how I got it out. Um, New Orleans soundtrack. You hear that? That's the soundtrack of New Orleans. Okay. I'll tell you what, this is one creepy city, man. A lot of violence, a lot of crime, a lot of craziness, a lot of witchcraft, voodoo, everything. It's nuts. Now, as you can see behind me, we have the Superdome. A lot of people don't talk about what really happened there. I did a lot of work for the NFL and things like that through the years, and have been to the Dome many times doing a lot of work. Actually, that Friday, besides working on Last Chance, I also worked on a preseason game that Friday night before Katrina. It was the Baltimore Ravens and the New Orleans Saints. And I remember they had the monitor on and they were looking at the weather, and they hadn't quite pinpointed whether New Orleans was going to be hit or not. So it was still kind of up in the air. So the things that happened at the Superdome, you would never believe. A lot of the news didn't report it unless you were there. I wasn't there during it all. I had friends that were there. Um, that tried to get out because people were locked in, but it was horrible. Some of the things that happened, they had a lot of gang members that were there trying to take over the National Guard and the local police. They had to escort Eddie Compass, which was uh, the police chief at the time, who was a guy I knew pretty well. And they would, and they would, women, when they would go into the restrooms, they were assaulted, and it was horrible. They had people jumping to their death from the terrace level of the Superdome, which is like the way up nosebleed section, of course, and just to escape the madness, they would jump to their death. It was a horrible scene. A lot of the news didn't report it. A lot of the news didn't report 70% of the things that really happened during that storm. The things within the city, not the damage or the things like that, the criminal things that happened. Uh, it's beyond description. Now, once I get back to where I am, where I'm staying, I'm going to do another video, and I'm kind of going to go in depth on other things and that I experienced personally. Now, this is my personal experience from what I experienced while I was here during Katrina. And all I could say is we kind of got to jump on the apocalypse, because it was definitely apocalyptic. That's for sure. Okay, I'm on my way back home or where I'm staying. Good afternoon. It's September 11th, 2025, Thursday. I'm going to continue my story on Katrina. It was the 20th anniversary of Katrina, and I went to different areas and filmed parts of my experience, and I'll be talking about that uh, towards the end of this video. Excuse me. And but I want to start off, commemorating this 24th anniversary of 9/11, a day we all remember, I'm sure a lot of us do. Uh, Also, I would like to bring up the September 10th assassination of Charlie Kirk. I know a lot of people didn't agree with his ideas. All he wanted to do was a platform for everyone to get and hear everyone's side, whatever their opinions may be. I would like to give a special shout out to Jeffree Star. If anyone knows who he is, he has a channel on YouTube doing tutorials on various things, makeup and etc. I would love to give a special shout out to him and his kind words for Charlie Kirk, as well as people like Jesse and Greg and Alex Jones, so many people. Glenn Beck, um, but Jeffree Star had some very kind words for Charlie Kirk, and I know his family appreciates it, and there are just countless others to mention that were so kind and her mourning that are mourning his loss. So, it's funny. On September 10th, 2001, I was working on a film. It was a film for Showtime. It was called Going to California. It's so ironic. And we were filming at a baseball stadium, which was supposed to be Fenway Park in Boston. And what it was, I've never seen the show. I don't usually watch a lot of shows that I've worked on, um, but I know it had something to do with someone flying out from Boston to California. And this baseball stadium that we were filming in was such a beautiful day. A cool front came in and gorgeous, beautiful blue skies. And what was funny was not funny, but what was ironic was the next day, as we all know what happened, September 11th, 2001, one of the planes uh, that had taken off came out of Boston en route to Los Angeles, California. I just found that a little weird, finding out the next day where the different planes were headed to, and one of them being from Boston to LA. And the show that I was working on, Going to California, just found it a little strange and ironic. But we all remember that day, and I remember uh, going into the front room because someone had woke me up and said that a plane crashed into the World Trade Center, and I thought it was like a Piper twin engine or something like that. But when I came into the living room and turned around and looked at the TV, like, I don't know, a few seconds later, maybe half a minute later, the second plane hit. And well, we all know what happened. But so getting back to Katrina and the story of Katrina, I showed you the videos of where the body was and the parking lot. I finally got the car out that Sunday. That Saturday, I was at Sam's Club because the Red Cross was there and nothing was open. The Red Cross was there and other um, organizations were there that were set up in the parking lot. And also in the parking lot were the refrigerated trucks that the bodies they recovered, that's where they put the bodies. It was a makeshift morgue. And those refrigerated trucks were in the parking lot of Sam's Club. Well, when I was there, I had run into a friend of mine who worked in the theater. He was a stagehand. And we got to talking about how I've been trying to get down to get the car out of the parking lot. And he asked how I was getting into Orleans Parish since they had blocked it off. And I told him the various ways I took. With one of my neighbors, then the Wednesday, there was a rescue worker coming down the street looking for gasoline, and we siphoned some gas uh, in one of the neighbor's cars that had evacuated and gave it to the rescue worker. He tried to bring me downtown to get my car out of the parking lot, but his truck got flooded on Metairie Road. I really felt bad, and responsible for his truck getting flooded out. And but when I had talked to the guy that I worked with, who was a stagehand, um, he had a property on Cleveland Avenue that he rented out, and he never heard from the tenant, and he was really concerned, and he wanted to get down there. And I told him, he goes, well, look, why don't I get my sister to drop us off there tomorrow? And I was sure. And I had my bicycle, and he had a bicycle. But see, the thing was, as soon as I got into New Orleans, I got a flat tire and I had to ride all the way back. And I was staying in Metairie at the time. And I had to ride all the way back on a flat tire. I remember when I was on St. Charles Avenue, there was a step van going down St. Charles Avenue, and it was like a mechanic on wheels. I'll never forget this. You know, there were a lot of nice people, and there were a lot of not so nice people. And I remember going up to the guy and asking him if, you know, because he had an air compressor. And I asked him if he could, fill my bike tire up with air. He tells me, get away from my van or I'm going to shoot you. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you were dealing with. Saw a lot of horrible people. Saw the nice people, don't get me wrong, but a lot of horrible people. But anyway, he wanted to go down there and he brought his bicycle and an extra bike since I had a flat tire. And that Sunday, the next day, we made our trek to go down there. We both made a lunch to go down there, and he had a couple of plums or oh, what was it? Nectarines. He had a couple of nectarines that he had for lunch, and that's very vital to the story of getting the car out, believe it or not. And so we get to the parking lot. There's still a lot of water. Now, that Thursday, when I went down there to try to get the car out of the parking lot and I was on the bicycle, I remember there was a lot of water, and in front of the parking lot, they had a pallet jack that was just sitting in the water. And I thought about it. I'm like, maybe I could get the pallet jack, raise the car up, and then ease it out of the parking lot. Well, I didn't do it. And like I said, I didn't get the car that day. And what happened when we go back that Sunday and we go to the parking lot, there were these guys that I guess had the same idea as me, because what happened, they were trying to get their car. Now, their car wasn't in the parking lot, it was on the street, so it must have got flooded out. They were probably trying to go through the water and ended up getting flooded out. And they were using that pallet jack to try to raise up the car to get it out of the water. Well, by the time we got there, the whole under uh, part of the car was ripped off. So they destroyed their fender and the under part of the car trying to use that pallet jack. And I was thinking to myself, man, I'm glad I didn't use it. My car would have been ripped up in the front. So we get to the parking lot, and look, they had people living in the parking lot. Like, they had tables set up, they had mattresses and everything. Same thing with the casino. It was Harris Casino. In the back of the casino, there was a back entrance, and there was a lot of space on this back entrance, on like a cement flooring and the steps going up to the entrance. And they had people living in there, living on the entrance itself, like the outside. They had people set up with tables and mattresses and things like that, barbecuers and all, and they were living in the back of the Harris Casino. So I go up to get the car, start the car. Beautiful sound it made here in that car start. And the thing that scared me the most, because when I went there that Thursday, uh, they were stealing cars out of the parking lot. They were stealing cars everywhere, but they were stealing cars out of the parking lot. And I was really nervous that my car was going to get stolen. And but what they were doing, they were stealing high riding vehicles that could make it through the water. And the car sat low, so I guess they didn't bother to take it. And so I get up there and I start the car and drive it down to the first level where the water was. So what I did, I took one of the nectarines that my friend had brought for lunch and I stuck it in the tailpipe. So we pushed the car out and it was in the water, probably not quite as halfway to the door, maybe a quarter of the way to the door, a quarter of the way up from the door. And the surprising thing is, it didn't even get wet inside. I was so surprised. And so we pushed the car through the water about 2 blocks, turned the corner, I believe, on Conti Street. I let the car sit for a few minutes and checked the oil, made sure there was no water in the oil, let it sit for a few minutes longer, checked the oil again, and the oil was good. It was clean, no water in the oil, and I started it up and got the heck out of there. And the other guy went on his way on the bicycle and, went to the house that he had rented out to find the person that was renting from him. And I made it home and got the car out. And after that, once I had the car, um, I was driving to Mississippi to Gulfport, Long Beach, Biloxi area, and it was totally destroyed. A lot of people don't talk much about how bad Gulfport, Biloxi, past Christian, and um, all those areas, Bay St. Louis, were destroyed. I mean, they were wiped out. When that big wave of water came in, it took everything. And one of the creepy things was there was a Kmart and a Walmart on Highway 90, which is the beach road, and it gutted out the Walmart. And it was such a weird sight. And I had the pictures and I erased them because I wanted to get better pictures because we were going to go back the other way to take some better pictures. But we couldn't go back the other way because there was no road. And stupid me erased the pictures. But um, there were pictures of the clothes that were from the Kmart and the Walmart in the trees, and it was all tattered clothes in these dead looking trees. It was like so ominous looking. It reminded me of that scene in War of the Worlds, the one with Tom Cruise, not Gene Barry, not the original, but the one with Tom Cruise, when the alien would zap the people and their clothes were tattered and fallen to the ground. That's how it looked. It was like all these tattered clothes in the trees, and yeah, it was weird, man. It was just a stressful, horrible time. I mean, there were so many things that happened during that storm. I remember as the storm was going on, because we stayed, the house shook, and there were houses just like the one I had that were totally demolished on the next block. Same exact design. We were very lucky, I gotta say. We were extremely lucky to make it through that storm. And it didn't flood where I was in Metairie, not in the neighborhood that I was in anyway. There were areas a few blocks down. There were areas like on Clearview Parkway and Causeway Boulevard and Metairie Road that were underwater. But thank the good Lord, mine wasn't. My street wasn't. The street where I was wasn't underwater. But uh, as the hurricane was going on, there's something I will never forget. I'm looking out the window and the wind's blowing. You could see debris going everywhere. There was a Shell gas station about a block away uh, on the other side on Clearview. Well, that big sign from the Shell station blew all the way onto my street and was in the road blowing around, blowing down the street anyway. Well, look, don't know where this came from. We tried to figure out who in the neighborhood could have had such a thing. We're sitting there looking out the window, watching all of the stuff blowing down the street. Out of freaking nowhere, here comes a blow up doll, blowing down the street. One of those blow up dolls. We were laughing, even though it was a terrible time. You couldn't help but laugh, and we're all looking at each other like, did we see what we actually saw? And sure enough, and it was funny because it was one of those old style blow up dolls. I'll never forget. It had like the painted blonde hair and the round mouth. It was just hilarious. And we were all trying to figure out, who it was, who it belonged to. Maybe someone on another street put it out there to let it get blow around as a joke. I don't know, but I just found it so hilarious. And but once everything calmed down and I got, after the hurricane, of course, um, I want to say it could have been that Sunday evening or it could have been Monday the next day. Uh, we drove to a little town called Laplace and there was a Wendy's open and we stopped and we got a hamburger. I got to tell you, it was one of the best hamburgers I've ever tasted in my life. Because before that, all we had were things like MREs and canned goods. We did have some food that, uh, that we stocked up on and that was in the freezer. So we had to use all that, stuff we barbecued and saved, put it on ice. And, we had that, but it wasn't like a fresh cooked hot hamburger. Sucker was so good. Now, after a friend of mine that I worked with at that theater that I had pointed out earlier, the Sanger Performing Arts Center, um, she took care of the maintenance uh, of the theater. And what she was doing, and everything was shut down, and couldn't get, back to my job working in the movies because everything was shut down. And she asked me if I wanted to help her gut out houses. And I said, sure, and she was paying 5,000 a week. And, that was pretty good money. And I did it. It was hard work. I never realized how hard it was. And, she was quite a hard person to work for. She was like I don't know, a tyrant, but a good person. But, she just wanted to get the job done. And it was kind of sad that people that were coming back to their houses and a lot of contractors took advantage of a lot of people, especially the elderly. Even though their houses could have been saved, they talked them into having the house raised, torn down, and they could have been saved. They just wanted to make money off these people, and I thought it was so wrong. And it was sad because you had all these elderly people, kind of like shaking as they were talking, saying, "You mean I can't keep my house?" And they're like, "No, you're not going to be able to keep your house." And it was just horrible. I didn't want no part of the what I was doing, the work after that. I couldn't do it. But the few days that I did work, um, and starting to see what was going on with these other contractors, not the woman I was working for, but the contractors who hired her to gut the houses out. I just didn't want to be around it. It was sad. You had all these people that were in their house going through their belongings and sentimental items that were crying, and it was a hard time. It really was. It was a hard time. And I remember one of the places we went to pull up the carpet. It was a restaurant called Bravo's, and I remember it must have been one of the workers, and they were taking stuff out of the refrigerators, and he had a wheelbarrow, and the refrigerators. Oh, the smell! It was horrifying. It was horrifying. We went to this one house, and the guy was a hunter, and he had all kind of game meat in his freezer and refrigerator that went bad because he came back way after, and the smell was horrifying. But the guy, I remember the kid at the Bravos. He had a wheelbarrow full of stuff that he was bringing to the dumpster. He would go for a few feet, stop, throw up. Go for a few feet, stop, throw up. I mean, that's how bad the smell was. Um, It was an interesting time. It really was. Something, as I had mentioned, I never want to go through it again. I have been through a few, Gustav and Ida and a couple others. That doesn't compare to Katrina. There's very few that compare to Katrina. But I just wanted to share a few of my memories and encounters with what happened that first week, first couple of weeks. And yeah, if you're ever in a situation, my advice, get out. They tell you to get out, get out. I know sometimes for a lot of people, me included, you find it hard to want to leave your property, especially, when you have, these people going around looting houses and while people are away, which is horrible. And, but, you know, you could always replace your things. You can't replace your loved ones or your own life. So I would suggest, if you're in any situation, whether you're involved in a tornado or an earthquake or a hurricane or any natural disaster, just leave. Just get away. Save yourself. Just get away. So, with that being said, I just want to wish everyone a good day and a good evening on this somber September 11th. And God bless everyone.